Hey everybody, I've been waiting to make this video due to several factors. Today is my birthday, and this is a special video to commemorate my birthday. Sharing these bikes I love with all of you guys who watch me. Not everybody's in the Antique Motorcycle Club of America. And for those who watch the channel, you know I've had my run-ins with them, but they're still a very important organization. And this little article in their last magazine, which I'm going to read to everybody, is exactly why. So I'm reading this for the guys who don't get the magazine, which is a lot of you. And you can just get the magazine, by the way, without being a member of the club, if that's what you wanted to do. So, this is titled The Fifth Founder, the story of C.H. Lang and a historic Harley. Carl Herman Lang. Now, as I go through this, these two gentlemen here, that is Lonnie Jr., Lonnie Jr. over here rather, and that's Lonnie Sr. I know both these gentlemen. I've known this man since he was a young boy, like about 10 years old. This is Cole's nephew, the big Cole auction. This is Cole's nephew. Lonnie Jr. has an inoperable brain tumor, and he might maybe last another 6 months. He's going on the last ride of his life right now on the Cannonball Run. He is the founder and creator of the Cannonball Run, Lonnie Jr. And he's going to pass from us. He's been a part of the motorcycle community for a very long time, and this is also for you, Lonnie. Cannonball starts here this week, and we're going to show you some really important Harley history. Well, I haven't even read the whole article, but we're going to read it all for everybody who wants to listen. It says, through the pearly gates, Lonnie Islam's Florida bike and the mystery of the world's first Harley-Davidson motorcycle. It's important to understand, in 1903, they had an idea and they had a drawing. They didn't actually build anything. Marsh, which became Marsh Mentz, M&M Twin, they were the world's largest motorcycle manufacturer. They made about 1,000 or so units in 1901 to 1903, a year. 1901, Indian started. They still weren't a big manufacturer by 03. They weren't big at all. Harley had a drawing. Merkel, which became Flying Merkel, was in Milwaukee. And their original bikes that they were actually producing looked very similar to the original Harley-Davidsons. Merkel left. He went to Pottstown, Pennsylvania, went to Middletown, Ohio. After that, very famous mark. But Harley survived. A lot to be said for surviving. Harley survived. So it says, C.H. Lang, the fifth founder of Harley-Davidson, by Herbert Wagner. Now, if you remember, I read from Herbert's book about what he had found out, what really happened. So Herbert, I know the man. He's an incredible fountain of knowledge. Just awesome, awesome guy. I quote, when he passes through the pearly gates and St. Peter asks him for the countersign, Mr. Lang will boldly say, Harley-Davidson, HD dealer, 1912. This here, as I understand it, it's a picture of Mr. Lang right there. And this is Harley-Davidson's advertisement at Mr. Lang's shop, right there. Down here it says, the photo top circa 1915 shows Carl H. Lang on a double-pedal 3-speed Harley twin with Mrs. Harley and a child in a Rogers sidecar, courtesy of the Johnny Harley family collection. Above, a Lang ad from 1906 shows a one-of-a-kind Harley with the 1905-06 6-stud engine, short pattern spring fork, and Lang clutch with the Lang catalog number 9. Now, 1915 was the first year Harley-Davidson offered a 3-speed transmission, but you could get a pedal start, okay, single speed. A 15 Harley 3-speed was 2 pedals and you kicked it forward. Well, it's in a kicker like we think of a kickstart, okay? Mystery Machine, Lonnie Islam Jr. and his son Senior and his son Lonnie Jr. with the early Harley-Davidson machine discovered in Florida as it appears today. Now, in my opinion, which will go forward on this article here, that's the bike. This particular bike, I believe, to be one of the first two prototypes made in late 1904. Late 1904, Harley-Davidson is actually offering ads for a motor that you could buy, and they made two prototypes. And I think this is one of them. The antique Harley-Davidson you see above belongs to AMCA member Lonnie Isom Jr. The name is probably familiar to you, since Lonnie is the man behind Competition Distributing, which specializes in parts for American motorcycles made in 1936. He is also the father of Lonnie Isom Jr., who has created the Motorcycle Cannonball Endurance Run, which will challenge about 100 riders to cross the North American continent on motorcycles made before 1917 this September. And they go on this same magazine talking about it later on, but we're talking about this particular bike. As they say, like father, like son. Isom's bike is unquestionably one of the oldest Harleys still in existence. We know that from the single-cylinder engine was built without a serial number and with 6 studs rather than 8, holding the 2 halves of the crankcase. These features place it among the first few dozen examples of Harley-Davidson motorcycles built from 1904 through 1906. Few dozen, 1904 through 1906. They were not a big company. Although Lonnie's bike is now fitted with a later fork and fenders, and at the time he discovered it, decidedly non-standard green paint, the motor is so early that the original machine was likely assembled in the legendary workshop in the Davidson family backyard. In other words, it has a pedigree that is of the equal of any antique motorcycle still in existence. Yet for years, the history of this motorcycle remained a mystery to the Isoms and other experts who saw it. They knew it was discovered in Florida in 1979, but of its previous ownership, there was only conjecture. And before I continue reading, I'll come back here and show you the bike here again. Here's a bottom picture of the crankcase in the belt. And it says, 6 studs holding the crankcase together identify the 04-06 Harley-Davidson engines. A hand-operated belt tightener gave early Harleys an advantage over direct drive machines. That's where it tightens the belt right here. It was high-tech. Okay, 6 studs in the crankcase. Recently, though, that situation changed. Evidence now suggests that this machine once belonged to one of the most important characters in Harley-Davidson's long history. I'm talking here about Carl H. Lang, the motor company's first dealer, an early HD director and shareholder, and the person who, more than anyone else, deserves the title of the 5th founder of Harley-Davidson. Well, huh? I thought there was 4 founders. Well, without Carl H. Lang, we wouldn't have a Harley-Davidson. End of story. Wouldn't have happened. Let's find out. Around the time he retired from business in 1926, it appears Mr. Lang took this antique Harley to his winter home in Florida. There it remained after Lang's death in 1944, gathering cobwebs until his eccentric son, Herman, passed away in early '79. Then the machine was placed on the street in a public sale. That's the year the story shifts to the father and son, Lonnie Isom Sr. and Jr. And the year marked the beginning of a whole new chapter of one of America's most intriguing antique motorcycles. You guys like the old ones. In 1979, Lonnie Isom Sr. was the owner of Competition Motorcycles in Houston, Texas. This independent bike shop built custom panhead and knucklehead choppers, eventually leading him into the business of restoring old Harleys and making replica parts. Back then, Isom's shop also built Harley racing engines and sponsored a drag racing team. At those races, crew members sometimes used a 1939 knucklehead with sidecar to tow the race bike, a souped-up Sportster called Orange Crush, back to the pits after each run. Some of you guys might remember the Orange Crush. Right here. That's a picture of Orange Crush. And that caption here says, 1979 Isom had entered this Orange Crush Sportster drag racer at an event in Gainesville, Florida, when another racer offered to sell him the first Harley ever made, found at a sidewalk estate sale, Atlantic Coast city of Melbourne. That's the caption. Back then, Eisen Shop also built Harley racing engines and sponsored a drag racing team. At those races, crew members sometimes used the 1939 Knucklehead with a sidecar to tow the race bike. Souped up Sportster called Orange Crush. Back to the pits after each run. In March of that year, Eisen and his crew were at a drag race in Gainesville, Florida. There, a fellow racer named Ricky saw the Knucklehead tow rig in action. He approached Eisen rider Lou Skopik and said, "You guys like the old ones, huh? Well, I've got the first Harley ever made in 1903. Interested in buying it?" Skopik brought Ricky over to talk to Lonnie and the spit mechanic, Tim McGovern, who were skeptical. Lonnie and I looked at each other and smirked, McGovern says, because what the guy said was beyond reality. In spite of those doubts, Lonnie thought the bike might be worth something rare and unusual, so he asked the price and was told that Ricky would take $2,500 for his 1903 Harley. Lonnie was broke at the time, but he said he'd raise the money and complete the purchase at a June race in Louisville. You gotta understand, a Knucklehead like this was $600. $2,500, you could buy two used shovel heads from, say, 1970. No problem. And shovel heads were still being made in 79. They were a brand new bike, $4,000. $2,500 was like, oh my God. Eisen succeeded in collecting the entire $2,500, but then he spent some of it arriving at Louisville race with $1,700. We were late getting there, he recalls, and Ricky had the old Harley partially mocked up when the crowd gathered around it. There was another guy who wanted to buy it, but Ricky and I shook on the deal. I told him I had spent some of the money, but would send him the rest when I got back to the shop. So we loaded the bike into the van and went racing. Finding history at a sidewalk sale. That Louisville weekend turned out to be good for Lonnie all around. His Orange Crush Sportster won the race, earning him points that would eventually result in a class championship that season. He went home to a motorcycle, but the motorcycle was clearly historic, even if it may not be everything the owner claimed. During the course of the weekend, McGovern learned how Ricky had acquired the early Harley. Ricky said he had been driving down a street in Melbourne, Florida, on the state's east coast one day when he passed a sidewalk estate sale and saw pieces of an old motorcycle among the household goods. He was tearing down a house, and everything inside was put on the sidewalk for sale, says McGovern. That's how he got it. He wasn't a collector. For him, the strap tank Harley, named for the distinctive fuel tank mounting system that would continue through 1908, was a novelty thing. It didn't require an expert to determine the motorcycle's brand or vintage. Cast in the engine's crankcase were the words Milwaukee and Harley Davidson. The bike used the so-called loop frame, front down tube curving under the single-cylinder engine. In other respects, it still looked like a bicycle with an engine and a fuel tank bolted on. It was so old that it didn't have a gearbox, just a flat leather belt running on pulleys between the engine and rear wheel. The most intriguing part of the machine, though, was the story that came with it. Ricky said when he bought it for $300, Eisen recalls one of the neighbors told him the house had belonged to a Harley-Davidson executive who had died, and it was the first Harley ever made. So he thought it was a 1903. Because at its spring fork, I thought it was a 1907, the year that the feature was first introduced. But back in the 70s, who knew or cared? One more thing. The bike came with an old wooden box containing a collection of oddball tools nobody could identify. Lou Skopik took them home and researched them, determined that they were likely used to repair some kind of organ or piano. Piano tuning tools found with an early strap tank Harley in a Florida house belonging to a deceased executive of Harley-Davidson. Whatever they meant, the clues were starting to add up. Eventually, it would help unravel the mystery of this historic machine. But 3 decades would pass before the full story was known. As found. This is the bike when they found it. $2,500 for that piece of crap. Everybody else thought he was nuts. Guarantee you. That's old Lonnie right there, as a young man, looking at this, going, man, what the fuck did I buy? Oh, I got taken. And here's the piano tuning tools right here. That's what they were. An encounter at the racetrack. To decipher the puzzle of Lonnie's Florida Harley, we need to go back to when motorcycling was in its infancy and a group of boys in Milwaukee decided to build one of their own. The boys were, of course, William S. Harley, along with the Davidson brothers, Arthur, Walter, and William. The origin of the Harley-Davidson machine can be traced to 1901, when William Harley began design work on a lightweight engine. Over the course of the next few years, Harley's work evolved into a complete motorcycle that was ready to compete in the emerging market for motorized two-wheelers. One of the key steps in the development of the Harley-Davidson brand came in September 9th, 1904, That's 2 days from now, anniversary, September 9th, 1904, when the company's founders had a chance to encounter with a Chicago man who was smitten by their machine. That man, Carl Herman Lang, became their business mentor and first dealer in an arrangement that would make them all successful, wealthy, and within the motorcycle industry, perhaps even immortal. On that date, members of the Chicago Motorcycle Club traveled north to Milwaukee to enjoy a day of motorcycle racing at the Wisconsin State Fair Park. Among those club members was Lang, a 35-year-old motorcycle enthusiast and maker of high-quality piano tuning tools. Years later, Lang claimed that he had owned one of the first motorcycles in Chicago, a Thomas Autobike he acquired in 1900. But by 1904, he was looking to make investments in the rapidly expanding motorized transportation field. And on that day in Milwaukee, he found exactly what he was looking for. The machines entered in those Milwaukee races represented several makes: Indian, Mitchell, Merkel, Marsh. Remember I said Marsh? Merkel. Remember I said Merkel? Rambler, and Anderson Special, whatever that was. Never even heard of that thing. Among them, though, were two spanking new local jobs with the name Harley Davidson lettered on the tanks. Overall, the Harleys, as they were soon known, greatly resembled the revamped Milwaukee Merkel introduced in late 1902. Like Joseph Merkel's machine, the Harleys featured modern loops, but they were powered by larger 24.74 cubic inch, about 405 cc single-cylinder engines, compared to the Merkel's 15.56 cubic inch, about 255 cc motor. An artistically inclined designer had created a well-integrated and attractive layout for his machine. Although the Harleys did not win either race in which they were entered, Carl H. Lang was impressed by their intelligent engineering and quality construction. This here is part of Lang's tool shop, where he did the piano tools, right there. And this is the backyard shed here, where Harley Davidson started, right there. Now we got origin stories. What did Harley Davidson actually build in 03, 04, and 05? The man behind the myth. Early HD advertising man Larry Crolius promoted the story that Harley Davidson produced and sold motorcycles in 03 or earlier. This guy here. But that was rampant lying back then. They always had to make the brand look bigger and better about it. Wow, we did this and that when they never did it. Over the decades, there have been numerous conflicting accounts of the origins of the Harley Davidson Motor Company. So what's the truth? Based on the most reliable evidence uncovered to date, the early efforts of one Harley and three Davidsons to build a motorized two-wheeler go like this. Beginning in 1901, Milwaukee boyhood pals William S. Harley and Arthur Davidson devised plans and began construction of a small engine for use in an ordinary bicycle frame. A circa 1920 document on display, the Harley-Davidson Museum describes this engine as having a bore of 2 1/8 inch, 2 7/8 inch stroke, and flywheels of 5-inch diameter, while an original 1901 dated drawing signed by Bill Harley shows a somewhat smaller engine with a bore and stroke of 2 1/4 inches and 4-inch flywheels. Some of the parts for this first motor were made on a lathe owned by Henry Milk, one of the boys' friends. When Walter Davidson came home to Milwaukee in the spring of 03, he used this small engine, either a 167cc or a 116cc, depending on which account is correct, to assemble a running motorized bicycle. This first engine was intended to be a do-it-yourself clip-on bicycle attachment, much like the other motor kits of the day. But when tested, it proved underpowered on hills. Mr. Harley once jokingly referred to it as the six-candle power job. No photograph of the original powered bicycle experiment is known to exist. By 03, motorized bicycles are being superseded by purpose-built motorcycles such as the 1903 Mitchell, made in Racine, Wisconsin, and the 1903 Merkel from Milwaukee. As a result, Bill Harley set about creating a totally new machine with a much larger engine displacing 24.74 cubic inches, about 405 cc. This bigger power plant was designed with the 9 3/4 inch flywheels that weighed a hefty 22 pounds. Some of the design features of the second engine may have been influenced by the previous work of another of the boys' friends, Ole Evinrude, who had achieved fame as the builder of outboard motors for boats. Bill Harley's second two-wheeler design was of robust construction. It contained advanced motorcycle features, including a hand-operated belt tightener and release to control delivery of power to the rear wheel, a loop frame like the one designed by Joseph Merkel for his machine. That frame design, in which the front down tube curves below the engine, would become common among American motorcycles of the era, since it allows the engine to be carried lower, moving the center of gravity closer to the ground for better handling. This is the first real Harley-Davidson motorcycle, and from this sound beginning, the company's entire FL line of motorcycles has evolved. First FL, right there, over there, our two-tone, 41. We know that two examples of this complete motorcycle were finished by the late summer of 1904, since they were entered in the races on September 9th of that year at Wisconsin State Fairgrounds. Although similar to the Eisenbike, these machines would have had rigid front forks and probably lacked fenders. Parts for the 04 prototype motorcycle were likely made at the Milwaukee Road Rail Shops, where a third Davidson brother, William A. Davidson, was the foreman. The components were then assembled into a complete machine in a small wooden shed behind the Davidson family home. In the spring of 05, series production of Harley-Davidson motorcycles began on a modest scale. Spring of 05. Spring of 05. The 05 engine had a different motor mount position when compared to the 04 prototype, and its piston displacement was increased to 26.84 cubic inches, about 440 cc. Harley-Davidson later designated the 05 machine as Model 1, and during that year, some 5 to 8 machines were produced in 1905. Late spring. Beginning in 1908, Lacey Coriolis, and an advertising writer for Harley-Davidson, began issuing material claiming that the firm did build and sell motorcycles similar to the Eisenbike in 1903 or even earlier. The most likely reason for this claim was to help Harley-Davidson compete with pioneer brands like Indian, Merkel, and Mitchell, all of which dated back to 01. However, an examination of original documents and photos provides no evidence that Harley-Davidson produced or sold motorcycles in 1903 or earlier. Because of this discrepancy between historical evidence and advertising claims, it is common to find references to both 1903 and 1904 as the creation date of the first Harley-Davidson motorcycle. The earliest documented evidence of a Harley-Davidson motorcycle comes from a newspaper accounts of the September 9, 1904 motorcycle races held at Milwaukee. Based on preliminary results of these races, it was previously thought that just one Harley-Davidson was present, but thanks to further sleuthing by AMCA member Richard Werner, we now know that 2 Harley-Davidson motorcycles were completed by that date. That evidence comes from an item in the September 9th, 1904 morning edition of the Milwaukee Free Press that contains the entry list for the races to be held later that day. Named are 2 Harley-Davidson riders, Edward Hildebrand and Walter Davidson, and their machines. That agrees with production figures from 1904 given on the Harley-Davidson Museum 1920 factory sheet mentioned above. Of course, it's not clear exactly when these 2 bikes were finished or whether they were identical. Obviously, they did some editing to the article there. Of course, it's not clear exactly when these 2 bikes were finished or whether they were identical, but considering how these things go, it seems likely that the boys were still tinkering with their hand-built machines on the morning of those landmark races held at Milwaukee 112 years ago. Herbert Wagner. I'm going to read this, I'm going to show it to you. The entry list printed in Milwaukee Free Press from September 9th, 1904 shows 2 Harley-Davidson motorcycles and the riders that will participate in the races on the Wisconsin State Fairgrounds track in Milwaukee later that day. These races provide the earliest known evidence of Harley-Davidson motorcycles in the historical record. One thing to make a claim, it's another thing to have a record. That's the list right there. I'm going to read it to you. Motorcycle. 5 Mile Open. Frank Zerbia, Mitchell. H. Edwards, Marsh. R. H. Weaver, Indian. Walter Davidson, Harley-Davidson. Edward Hildebrand, Harley-Davidson. St. Croix, Johnstone, Mitchell. Frank Anderson, Anderson Special. Must have been his own bike. A. Nichols, Rambler. Henry Zerbel, Merkel. Paul Stamson, Indian. 10 Mile Handicap, same riders. We continue. Touring the factory. Based upon what he saw that day, Lang decided to further investigate his new Milwaukee machine. From a 1923 article in Motorcycling magazine, we learned that he soon arranged a visit to the company plant on the prairies near Milwaukee's western city limits. Arriving at the correct address, all Lang found was a 2-story home. Walking around back, he discovered the factory, a small shed where the first Harley-Davidsons were assembled. By then, Lang admitted he had fallen in love with the boy's motorcycle and begged to buy one on the spot. But Bill Harley and the Davidsons had none on hand to sell, so Lang placed an order, and 6 weeks later, his new machine was ready. A 1912 article from Motorcycle Illustrated indicates that Lang obtained one of the first 3 Harleys ever produced. Since we know that the 2 HDs were entered in the September '04 races, the '04 prototype on another machine, it appears Lang may have received the very next one constructed. Impressed by the hard-working efforts of the bike's creators, Lang proposed to young Bill Harley and the Davidsons that he become their general sales agent and their first dealer, all as a sideline to his piano tuning tool business in Chicago. They agreed, and as a result, Lang handled 3 1905 Harley-Davidsons out of a production run that likely totaled 5 to 8 machines. The growth of a new brand. The 1906 Harley-Davidson was similar to the previous year's model. One noticeable change was the addition of an attachment lug on the rear of the frame head for the sidecar. There was also the option of Renault gray paint in addition to piano finish black. Earlier that year, Lang began placing small advertisements for Harley-Davidson in Chicago newspapers. One March 1906 ad tells of Harley-Davidson victories made at Chicago's Garfield Park on July 4th, 1905. In 2 different events, Walter Davidson and his teammate Perry E. Mack claimed second and first place finishes. But in the 10-mile championship, Perry E. Mack, who went on to design the legendary overhead valve Waverly, P.E., and Jefferson line of motorcycle engines and overhead valves, very fast, met with disaster when a dog dashed onto the track and Mack hit it. While Mack survived, the dog did not. Another ad from April 1906 reads, Motorcycle News, new Harley-Davidson machines, noiseless and speedy, Lang and Lyon, 35 East Adams Street. So who is this Lyon appearing with Lang in the ad? It's George W. Lyon, Lang's early partner in the motorcycle trade. Along with Walter Davidson and Ralph Sporlater, Lyon was part of the Harley-Davidson team in the 300-mile endurance contest from Chicago to Milwaukee and back held on September 15th and 16th, 1906. The contest consisted of 23 riders on HD Indian, Armac, Yale, California, Rambler, Merkel, Manson, never even heard of that one, Yale, Landgraf, never heard of that one either, Orient, Torpedo, Clement, Bayard, never heard of that one either, wow. While Lyon, Sporlater, and a few others finished with their perfect scores, poor Walter Davidson dropped out when the rear wheel stays of his frame broke. Rear wheel stays of his frame broke. Curiously, the rear frame section of Lonnie Isom's early Harley-Davidson was replaced at some unknown date in the past, if only those old parts could talk. The next month, Lang, Lyon, Sporlater, and Walter Davidson competed in a hill climb event at Perry Hill near Algonquin, Illinois. When the scores were combined, the 4 Harley-Davidsons made the best average time of the contest. Afterward, the Chicago Examiner called the Harley-Davidson far advanced in design and superior in finish and workmanship. This allowed Lang and Lyon to brag that the HD was the motorcycle to ride, the motorcycle to buy. During this time, Lang was extending loans to his cash-strapped partners back in Milwaukee and shipping them tooling purchased at a discount in Chicago. They paid him back with new motorcycles. This arrangement allowed Harley-Davidson to increase production for '06 to about 50 bikes. In that year, Lang and Lyon's sales offered on a cash-only basis amounted to 24 machines, or about half the company's total output. About 50 bikes for 1906. Late that year, the expanding manufacturing company moved up the block from the Davidson backyard to a new factory on Chestnut Street. This location, what is now known as West Juneau Avenue, remains the world headquarters of Harley-Davidson 110 years later. Meanwhile, the bikes were also evolving. While the 1907-1908 Harley-Davidson shared the same overall strap tank design of the '04-'06 machines, there were significant updates. The first '07 model was the first HD equipped with a spring fork. The 2 versions of the forks were used that year, with a stronger design adopted in '08. Now you might remember the coal auction they just recently had. A beautiful '07 strap tank went to the museum in Salt Lake City. Beautiful bike, $775,000 plus juice, just gorgeous machine. Also in 1907, the crankcase was redesigned with 8 studs holding the 2 halves together rather than 6 studs of the previous version. For the first time, a sequential serial number was stamped onto every motor Harley-Davidson produced. First motor numbers, 1907. This here is a photograph of 1907, 8-stud motor. Right there. And that is a Planetary clutch, devised by Lang. It shows the two-speed planetary transmission and clutch invented by Lang. This may have been the first changeable gearing device on any American motorcycle. Excuse me a second, I gotta walk around and turn these dumbass fucking lights back on. The fucking DWP insisted I had to have. Because it saves money. How the fuck does it save me money when I gotta spend half my day walking around turning these dumb motherfuckers on? God damn it, it pisses me off. If they even turn on, half the time they don't even turn on. Now if you had a crew of a couple hundred people walking around all day long, it might work. I'm one guy. Stupid motherfuckers. Anyhow, we continue. Parting ways. During 1907, C.H. Lang and George Lyon got into a disagreement over a motorcycle clutch that Lang had invented, but that Lyon claimed an interest in. When Harley-Davidson decided in Lang's favor, Lyon's connection with the Milwaukee firm was severed. Subsequent ads showed that Lyon became a Chicago agent for torpedo motorcycles built in Illinois and Peugeot machines imported from France. I bet that really pissed him off. But George W. Lyon had another HD distinction worth noting. In 1905, he acquired the first Harley-Davidson prototype, one of the first two machines that appeared in that fateful September 1904 race, from its original owner, Henry Meyer of Milwaukee. After riding the world's first Harley-Davidson for a few months, Lyon passed it on to a Dr. Webster of Rush Medical College. This significant machine will appear later again in our story. In my opinion, that's the one that Lonnie Eisen Sr. has. During 1907, Lang, now operating on his own, sold 46 HD machines out of a total production run of 150 motorcycles. 1/3 of production. Oh my God. He also authorized several new dealers around the country and supplied them with machines. In Chicago alone, additional dealerships included the Motorcycle Supply Company at 3513 Prairie Avenue, and the Lincoln Park Motorcycle Shop at 624 North Clark Street. That year, Lang was also made secretary of the Chicago Motorcycle Club, of which he was a charter life member, and in 1909 he was elected club president. The next year, Lang was appointed regional commissioner for the Federation of American Motorcyclists, FAM, one of the predecessors organizations to today's American Motorcyclists Association. Unlike some early dealers who offered several different makes, Lang just sold one. His chief Chicago competitor, Ira Whipple, the Wizard of Motorcycledom, handled the Indian, Curtis, Merkel, Yale, California, Marschmitz, and Raycycle brands. By comparison, Lang's approach, as conveyed in a 1907 ad, was simple and direct. Harley-Davidson motorcycle is the best touring machine, noiseless, strong, powerful, every part guaranteed. C.H. Lang, 35 East Adams Street. Buy the best or go home. Don't fuck around. Although sometimes the subject of criticism in more recent years, the single brand loyalty would become a hallmark among Harley dealers for decades to come. And once again, Carl H. Lang led the way. For 1908, Lang closed out Harley's strap tank era by selling near 1/4 of the company's production and distributing additional carloads of machines to other dealers. Lang the inventor. Besides his business acumen, Lang was noticed for his skill as a machinist and inventor. He held several patents for piano tuning tools, while the motorcycle clutch he invented was installed on some 150 Harley-Davidsons between 1906 and 1911. At least 2 examples of Lang's clutch survive today. Meanwhile, in 07, Lang developed a planetary-style 2-speed transmission that could be fitted to the output shaft of a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. U.S. patent number 908583. Changeable speed gearing for motorcycles. Planetary gear transmissions for bicycles had been around since the 1880s, but Lang's design, gotta change the page here, unveiled at the Curtis Hill Slow Climb near Milwaukee in May of 07, it had been the first multi-speed device fitted to any American motorcycle. While Lang's clutch, $15 extra, big money, whoa, and 2-speed gear device, $40, wow, gave satisfactory performance, the clutch tended to burn the flat leather belt drive, too much power. In addition, the location of both units on the outboard engine shaft made them prone to damage if the bike fell over. Whoops, dropped another one. For those reasons, they remained optional equipment. For $40! Oh, man! Oh, that was so much money. You guys don't understand. When the Harley-Davidson Motor Company incorporated in September 07, Lang took on just 5 shares of company stock. Although he was never one of the leading shareholders, his stake in the enterprise continued to grow. By the 1970s, it amounted to 17,000 shares of AMF Harley-Davidson stock. C.H. Lang also sat on the Harley-Davidson board of directors, where all critical model and marketing decisions were made for almost a quarter of a century. By all accounts, Lang was a generous man. Once he played matchmaker for a Chicago jazz musician named Louis Fluke, who happened to be one of the Lang salesmen. Fluke fell in love with Lang's secretary, Rose Rucci, and began taking her on long motorcycle rides in the country. When the two were married at around 11, Lang blessed the union by arranging for the newlyweds to open a Harley-Davidson dealership in Dayton, Ohio. Dean of all Harley dealers. In 1912, Lang moved his dealership from 35 East Adams to 1704 South Michigan Avenue in the midst of Chicago's famed Automobile Row. There, he occupied a 3-story brick structure while using another building for storage of bikes and parts. By this time, Lang was selling or distributing nearly 1,000 Harley-Davidsons per year. That's massive! Oh my God, that's bigger than Barnett. In 1914, he disposed of his piano tool business and devoted all his energy to the motorcycle trade. That spring, Lang led a procession of 3,000 Harley-Davidsons in the annual pleasure, let me flip the page here, run and picnic to Crown Point, Indiana. This event, sponsored by his dealership, was said to be the largest procession of any single-make motorcycles ever held. Probably is still today. We had a lot of team bikes. William S. Harley and Walter Davidson even tagged along. Heralded as the dean of all Harley-Davidson dealers, Lang developed sales tools that became a model for the industry. He annually mailed out 3,000 postcards, offering catalogs and free demo rides to prospective customers. Postcard was the tech of the day. It was like email. That was the average, and he developed it. That was it. Send your postcard. He's the man who did it. Every day, the salesmen were assigned 10 prospects to seek out and entice back into the showroom for a sale, and Lang insisted that a salesman know the strengths and weaknesses of every rival make, be relentless in pursuit of new customers, and be willing to work nights, weekends, and holidays. You got to work when the customers are willing to buy. That's the tool of this trade. If you can't put in 15-hour days, 365 days a year, you can't do this business. That's how it works. So before I read some more, following is your tour of European factories, Lang told assembled HD dealers in 1920 the Milwaukee motorcycle was the best in the world. That's a picture here. We haven't read that story yet, but we're getting there. That's the picture here. The dealer meet in 1920. And this here is 1908 HD single with clutch and magneto, $30. 1910 HD battery model, A1 condition, $35. 1911 HD single magneto clutch model, $40. These are used prices. 1910 HD motorcycle and magneto, $45. Indian motorcycle motor with magneto and Schebler carburetor, $25. One Excelsior motorcycle motor, $25. C.H. Lang. An ad placed by Lang in 14 shows what would be $1 million bike collection today, available at that time for $200. Magneto-equipped '08 Harley is puzzling, as only battery models cataloged that year. The clutch listed on the machine that would have been the Lang version, since the HD clutch did not appear until the 1912 model. Buy them all for $200. A bunch of used garbage. Who wants that crap? So, we continue. Let me show this little thing here. This is Lang on the right. Says Lang Wright outside his Michigan Avenue shop in 13. Around this time, he took the first Harley-Davidson motorcycle in trade from Stephen Sparrow. It remained in the building as late as 1916. Right here. Now, Lang was proof that a good motorcycle dealer could make money even in a tough market like Chicago with its traffic congestion, cold winters, and irresponsible auto drivers. Indeed, Lang himself had been struck by a criminal flyover driver in 1910 and never walked with a limp ever after that. Those hazards of motorcycling negatively affected sales, especially among young upper-class customers whose parents could afford to pay cash, but generally forbade their children from riding motorcycles. So by 1916, Lang adopted a time payment plan for the less affluent buyers, with the delivery made when one half of the purchase price was paid. Without such programs, he warned, a dealer would go broke, as working-class customers were constantly changing their addresses and dropping out of sight. 1919, following World War I, Lang traveled overseas on a tour of the English and European motorcycle industries. In his birthplace of Germany, Lang was surprised by the number of Harley-Davidsons he encountered. How they got into Germany, he remarked, I do not know. We did not sell them at any time during the war, but there they are. Upon his return to the U.S., Lang addressed the Harley-Davidson Dealers National Convention. There he expressed his heartfelt conviction about the Milwaukee brand. We have the machine with which none of them, European manufacturers, can compare. He told his fellow dealers, we have the best motorcycle made in the world, there's no question about it. Lang's brand loyalty and commitment were so strong that the Milwaukee firm honored him by saying, his heart is wrapped up in Harley-Davidson progress. When he passes through the pearly gates and St. Peter asks him for the countersign, Mr. Lang will boldly say, Harley-Davidson. A little ad here. Right there. That says, Harley ad manager Walter Kieman-Hagen lights Lang's cigar in the 1920 HD cartoon. Note the cane slung over Lang's arm. In 1910, Lang's leg was fractured in two places when he was struck by an automobile. Tracking the world's first Harley. In addition to being the first Lang Harley-Davidson dealership, C.H. Lang's shop was notable in the 1910s for another distinction. It was the home of the motorcycle repeatedly described as the first Harley-Davidson ever built. You'll recall that we were introduced to this machine. One of the two Harleys entered the Milwaukee races on September 9, 1904, earlier in the story. Accounts indicate, after the race, this prototype motorcycle was sold to Henry Meyer of Milwaukee, who sold it in 2005 to Lang's partner, George W. Lyon. Lyon then passed it on to a Dr. Webster of Rush Medical College. So what happened to it after that? In a testimonial letter to Lang, written by Stephen Sparrow and printed in the Harley-Davidson Dealer publication 1912, an ownership history of the bike was given. This told how the machine had passed from Dr. Webster to Louis Fluke, the Lang salesman who ended up establishing his own Harley-Davidson dealership in Dayton, Ohio. In 2007, Fluke sold it to Stephen Sparrow, who owned and rode it for several years. Finally, according to 1914 HD publication, Dealers Who Have Made Good, Sparrow had, in 1913, treated the bike to Lang as partial payment on a new machine. We know all this because of a testimonial letter Sparrow wrote to Lang in 12, giving the ownership history of this machine. That letter was printed in the May 12 issue of the Harley-Davidson Dealer publication. During this period, the bike became increasingly famous. In various accounts, the landmark machine was trumpeted by the Harley-Davidson Motor Company as having racked up 51,000 miles, 82,000 miles, nearly 100,000 miles, and over 100,000 miles with a major engine repair. The bike was noted again in the Motorcycle Illustrated edition of November 23, 1916, which said this vintage of 1903 Harley-Davidson was the first thing customers saw when entering the Lang dealership showroom. You got to remember, 03 to 16 is 13 years. That's a long time, especially back then when things were innovating every month. Although historical research indicates it would be more accurate to describe this bike as a 1904 prototype, what seems clear is that at least from 1914 to 16, Carl H. Lang was the owner of what was acknowledged to be the world's first Harley-Davidson motorcycle. And after that, well, no one knows for sure. Indeed, after 1916, this precious relic of American motorcycle vanishes from the public eye. So, this here is a picture, right there, of heading south. William S. Harley, Arthur Davidson, and Carl H. Lang in the 1920s after Lang had retired to Florida. Lang's with the cane, right there. And this here says the patent drawing from 1909 shows how the Lang 2-speed transmission worked. That's the patent drawing, right there. Going out of business. While the fate of the motorcycle may be obscure, we know exactly what happened to C.H. Lang and his famous dealership. By the 1920s, Lang had amassed a considerable fortune, I guess at 1,000 bikes a year. Ooh. And increasingly, he turned over the management of the dealership to his son and only child, Herman W. Lang. Unfortunately, young Herman didn't turn out to be a chip off the old block. With his old man's money to burn, he apparently didn't feel the need to work. And the last thing he wanted was the responsibility of running a big city Harley shop with all the headaches that came with it. So in 1926, when the elder Lang was retired, Herman blamed poor health for his inability to continue his father's business. Thus, Lang transferred his franchise and his inventory to Frank Kemper, formerly of Collins and Kemper, and the Chicago Excelsior agents. Kemper then moved the operation to 1507 South Michigan Avenue. Once retired, Lang and his wife Louise routinely spent their winters on the east coast of Florida at Indialantic, a community on the Outer Bank opposite the city of Melbourne. There Lang kept a boat and belonged to the local Anglers Club as well as the Melbourne Chamber of Commerce. Lang built warehouses in his new community and helped start the flagship bank. He also assisted in development of the Melbourne Harbour and Boat Basin projects. Was no longer directly involved in selling Harleys. Lang remained in close contact with the company's founders. Years later, Arthur Davidson II, the son of a company founder, remembered him this way. Mr. Lang was a Sherman, German guy from Chicago with a real heavy accent. He did good as a dealer and then moved to Florida and invested in real estate. Once he invited them all down there, Mrs. Harley stepped on a snake and let it scream so loud they heard it back in Milwaukee. Lang remained on the Harley-Davidson board of directors until March 7, 1930, when he formally resigned. But he never lost his love of motorcycling. Lang retained his records from the years as a dealer, storing them in his home at 8034 Luella Avenue in Chicago's Southtown neighborhood, where he and his wife returned every summer. At some point in those years, Lang did something else that goes to the heart of this story. He removed an early Harley-Davidson motorcycle from his dealership inventory and took it to Florida, where it may have been used in parades or for occasional pleasure riding. For decades, the story of C.H. Lang, Harley-Davidson's first dealer and the businessman who helped get the company off the ground, was forgotten. So was the early motorcycle he took to Florida. Then in the 1970s, his memory was revived when one dogged collector learned enough about Mr. Lang's career to track down a relative in Florida. From that person, he learned that the family still owned an antique bike. But the collector got no further. He never saw the machine, nor did he learn what year or model it was. A few years later, another rumor surfaced where some guy that brought the disassembled pieces of an early HD into a Florida motorcycle shop and wanted $1,500 for it. The story said the dealer passed on the offer and the bike vanished back into limbo. Then in 1979, Lonnie Eisen bought this early strap-tank Harley from a fellow drag racer. It had been found disassembled in a estate sale that year in Melbourne, Florida. It was accompanied by a collection of old piano tuning tools, described by the seller as a 1903 Harley, possibly the first motorcycle the company ever made. The seller said it had belonged to a deceased executive of the Harley-Davidson Motor Company. So let's add these things up. Carl H. Lang was a piano tuning tool maker and the first Harley-Davidson dealer and distributor. He was also an early motorcycle shareholder and director and very much an executive of the firm. After retiring in 26, Lang and his wife routinely wintered in Melbourne, Florida, and most important, Lang was at one time the acknowledged owner of one of the world's first Harley-Davidson motorcycle, the bike that afterward vanished from sight. Those are the pieces of one of the motorcyclist's most long-standing puzzles. How do they fit together? In 1944, when Carl H. Lang died, Harley-Davidson eulogized him by saying they had gone to his eternal reward. The man who might be considered the fifth founder of Harley-Davidson and passed through the pearly gates, as all mortals must, but one question remains. What did Mr. Lang leave behind? That's a question we'll attempt to answer next issue. Stay tuned. So, when next issue comes, we'll make another video. But this here, this is the bike here. Says the bike that is looked with the green painted parts that came with it. At the time, Eisen used leather belts to replace the missing metal straps on the tanks. So that's when Lonnie first got it together. And we have to await the next issue. So that's my answer to the Discovery's Harley and the Davidsons. We have a drama. I have a documentary. We'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.